At exactly 7:03 a.m., I was ripped awake by what I can only describe as violent wedding clapping. Not polite applause, not a neighbor cheering their kid's soccer goal. I'm talking about full-on Broadway finale-level clapping, coming from my backyard. I stumbled out of bed, half blind, and tripped over my own shoes, trying to find out who had summoned Satan this early on a Saturday. And that's when I saw it. My dock. My private, grandfathered, legally HOA-exempt dock, now hijacked, smothered in satin ribbons, draped in white tulle, and lined with folding chairs like the world's worst wedding crashers, had built a temple of audacity overnight. And at the center of it all, standing like she was about to launch an invasion, was Karen, queen of the HOA, destroyer of weekends, mother of all bad ideas, dressed in a power beige outfit so aggressive it practically assaulted my retinas. She turned to me, smiling like she had just burned down my house, and wanted me to thank her for the warmth. "Oh good, you're up," she chirped, waving a clipboard like a battle flag. "Isn't it beautiful? Beautiful." She had broken onto my property, built an unauthorized wedding venue on my dock, invited what looked like half the county, and now had the audacity to act like I should bring the snacks. It wasn't just trespassing. It wasn't even just entitled. This was Karen warfare, a full-scale invasion of my backyard under the banner of community spirit, and that's when it hit me. She thought she had won. She thought she had pulled it off. But she had no idea what was coming, because if Karen wanted a battle, I was about to unleash chaos. And it came with feathers. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. My dock, the dock I stained every summer, the dock my grandfather built by hand, the dock that was legally mine, was now buried under what looked like a Pinterest board having a mental breakdown. White cloth everywhere, flower arches toppling in the breeze, rows of folding chairs lined up like a budget royal wedding was about to kick off. And at the heart of it all stood Karen, hands on her hips, giant sun hat flaring out like a villain's battle helmet, sunglasses so big they could detect Wi-Fi signals. She wasn't just trespassing, she was presiding over her empire like some HOA Napoleon, claiming my property with the enthusiasm of a colonial power planting a flag. I staggered down the steps toward her, mouth opening and closing like I was learning English for the first time. "Karen," I finally croaked. "What? What are you doing?" She turned, flashed a smile so fake it should have come with a factory warning label, and said, "Oh, good, you're up. My niece is getting married today. Isn't it divine?" Divine? Divine, she had broken into my backyard, turned my dock into a wedding altar, filled my yard with strangers, and now she was grinning at me like she expected me to cry tears of gratitude. I sputtered. "You didn't ask. You didn't even tell me." Karen waved her hand like she was shooing away an annoying pigeon. "Sweetheart, it's community space." Technically, sweetheart. She actually called me sweetheart, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over not getting extra sprinkles. "It's not community space," I said, my voice climbing in pitch. "It's my property, my dock, I have the deed." Karen tisked, like I was interrupting an important TED Talk. "Oh, come on, you weren't using it. It's just a few hours, lighten up. You'll even get a slice of cake." A slice of cake. That was her peace offering. I could practically hear my blood pressure whistling in my ears. I spun around, stormed back into the house, and tore through my files until I found it, the property deed. Not just any deed, the sacred scroll that spelled it out plain as day, the dock, the lawn, the side path, all mine. HOE jurisdiction excluded under a grandfather clause written in legal stone before Karen was even born. I printed 3 copies, marched back down to the dock like I was serving eviction papers, and slapped one into Karen's French manicured hand. She glanced at it like it was a coupon for expired yogurt, then handed it off to a teenager holding a clipboard. "Oh, he's just a little cranky," she said to the wedding planner. "Let's get the aisle runner down before the photographer arrives." She wasn't even pretending anymore. She had fully entered dictator mode, brushing me off like an insignificant footnote in her glorious coronation. I stood there stunned as a catering van rumbled across my grass, leaving muddy tire tracks like scars across my carefully maintained lawn. A guy in a tux casually dragged a giant speaker across my deck. Folding chairs popped up everywhere like weeds after a summer rainstorm. Some guests started arriving, wearing matching pastel outfits and sipping champagne like they owned the place. I heard someone say, "Wow, this venue is adorable, so rustic," and I almost collapsed from rage. And that's when I did what any sane person would do. I called the police. The officer showed up, bless him, but one look at the decorations and the growing wedding crowd, and I knew how it was going to go. I showed him the deed. I explained the trespassing. I pointed out that I had witnesses eating off my grill and loitering in my rose bushes. He scratched his head, looked deeply uncomfortable, and said, "Well, unless there's immediate danger or property damage, this is probably a civil matter." A civil matter. Translation: good luck, buddy. You're on your own. Karen practically floated over to us, beaming like she had just won a Nobel Prize in audacity. "Thank you, officer. I told him we had permission," she sang, before fluttering back to her subjects to direct the placement of the chocolate fountain. The officer shrugged, helplessly, and left. And Karen? Karen patted my shoulder again and said, "Don't worry, neighbor, we'll save you some cake." At that exact moment, something inside me cracked. Not rage, not despair, no, something better. A cold, crystal-clear clarity that only comes when you realize you're not dealing with a reasonable person, you're dealing with a force of nature fueled entirely by self-delusion. I looked out over the lake, the sun sparkling on the water, the decorations fluttering like they were daring me to do something, and that's when I remembered. The ducks. Old Mr. Brenna down the road had once told me, "If you ever need ducks, son, you know where to find me." I had laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. That evening, I drove down the dirt road to Old Man Brina's farm, my headlights slicing through the mist like a scene from a horror movie. Fitting, because Karen had turned my life into one. Brina was outside, chewing on a piece of hay like he was born for this moment. When I explained I needed ducks, a lot of ducks, he didn't blink. He simply nodded sagely and said, "You want chaos? Ducks are agents of chaos." 10 minutes later, I was hauling a trailer with 25 ducks and 5 geese, each bird eyeing me like they knew they were about to be dropped into the most important mission of their feathery little lives. By midnight, with the wedding setup abandoned for the night, and Karen no doubt tucked into her HOA-branded pajamas, I unleashed my secret weapon. The ducks poured out of the trailer like a flood, wings flapping, beaks quacking, waddling with purpose straight toward the lake and the dock like an invasion force claiming new territory. The geese, meaner and smarter, positioned themselves strategically like sentries at a medieval fortress. I sprinkled birdseed everywhere across the chairs, the altar, the aisle, sowing absolute bedlam before retreating into my house to watch, from my upstairs window, sipping coffee like a Bond villain. Morning arrived like a slap. Karen's minivan screeched into my driveway at 6:30 a.m., the doors flinging open to reveal her army of florists, caterers, and clueless relatives. She strutted onto my lawn like Julius Caesar entering Rome, clipboard in one hand, latte in the other, ready to bask in the glory of her stolen venue. She didn't notice the problem immediately. Her sunglasses were so enormous I'm surprised she could see anything at all. For a few precious minutes, she barked orders, adjusted chairs, and made grand pronouncements like she was hosting the Oscars. Then came the first scream. It was a high, sharp, soul-rattling shriek as one of the florists stepped backward into a goose's personal space bubble and got hissed at with the fury of 1,000 suns. Karen spun around and saw it. A dock overrun with ducks, chairs splattered with feathers, flower arrangements being gleefully shredded by tiny beaks. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, confusion. then pure, undiluted rage. She stormed onto the dock, swatting at ducks like she thought she could intimidate them through sheer HOA authority. "Shoo, shoo, go away, this is a private event," she shrieked, flailing her clipboard like it was a sword. A duck stared at her, unimpressed, then flapped its wings and smacked her in the knee. Karen stumbled, knocking over an entire row of folding chairs, and a collective honk of triumph rose from the bird army. Red-faced and seething, she turned on her heel and marched to my front porch where I stood leaning casually against the railing, coffee in hand, wearing the smuggest smile humanly possible. "You!" she bellowed. "You did this!" I shrugged innocently. "The ducks live here, Karen. It's their lake, too. Maybe they just wanted to celebrate your niece's big day." Her jaw worked like she was chewing glass. "This is sabotage," she spat. "I'm calling animal control. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the HOA emergency hotline." I sipped my coffee and said, "Tell them to bring extra breadcrumbs." Meanwhile, the ducks were thriving. One had perched proudly atop the chocolate fountain, letting melted chocolate drip onto its feathers like it was being crowned king. Another pair waddled side by side down the aisle, weaving drunkenly through toppled vases and overturned chairs. A goose commandeered the guest book table, pecking holes into every RSVP card. A teenager tried to rescue the cake, only to trip over a duck and faceplant into the frosting. Absolute, beautiful mayhem. The guests started arriving, and it was instantly clear they hadn't been warned. Grandparents, in their Sunday best, recoiled in horror as ducks pecked at their shoelaces. Children screamed, half in delight, half in terror. Someone stepped into a particularly nasty patch of goose droppings and slipped, sending a tray of hors d'oeuvres flying through the air like confetti. Karen, trying desperately to maintain some illusion of control, shouted instructions at anyone who would listen, but no one was listening. Everyone was too busy dodging ducks, snapping pictures, or just openly laughing. Finally, animal control arrived. A guy with a truck and a net who took one look at the scene and doubled over laughing. I handed him the deed showing my property rights and the sanctuary laws protecting the wildlife on the lake. He wiped tears from his eyes and said, "Sorry, lady. These birds are residents now. You might want to reschedule or relocate or just accept your new duck overlords." Heron screamed, a sound so shrill it made the ducks flap in alarm and take off into the air, creating a squawking tornado of feathers around her perfectly staged altar. And that was the moment, standing on my porch with my coffee cooling in my hand, that I realized I hadn't just defended my property. I had triggered a full-blown duck-fueled revolution. Karen could summon her clipboard army. She could summon her HOA bylaws. But against the combined forces of property rights, Mother Nature, and 25 ducks with absolutely zero respect for human ceremony, she didn't stand a chance. The wedding was still technically an hour away, but the war had already been won. The hour before the ceremony was a symphony of disaster, a slow-building crescendo of Karen's crumbling delusions and rising duck supremacy. I lounged on my porch, basking in the chaos like a man who had just watched his arch-nemesis walk into every rake in the yard. That's when the real fireworks arrived. Brad, the groom. If you pictured a man who ironed his jeans, screamed at waiters, and considered shouting a valid debate tactic, you're already halfway there. Brad stormed onto my property like a rhinoceros wearing a rental tuxedo 2 sizes too small. His face was purple, his fists were bald, his hair was slicked back like he had fought the gel and lost, and he was furious. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask questions. He marched right up to my porch and barked, "You better remove your ducks before I sue you for everything you own." I almost spit my coffee. Karen, seeing her knight in polyester armor arrive, scurried behind him like a goblin whispering bad advice into his ear. I set my coffee down slowly, savoring the moment. "Brad," I said calmly, "those ducks aren't mine. They're free citizens of the lake, same as the geese, same as the fish, same as the turtles if you have a problem with them too." Brad's left eye twitched so hard I thought he might explode on the spot. "You think this is funny?" he growled. "You ruined the most important day of my life." I leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Buddy, if 25 ducks can ruin your marriage before it even starts, you might want to rethink the whole situation." Karen shoved a paper in my face, her nails practically puncturing the sheet. "Here!" she shrieked. "An HOA violation citation, property misuse, animal nuisance, obstruction of a community event." I glanced at it, smiled politely, then walked inside. When I returned, I carried a leather-bound folder containing my family's original property deed like it was the Holy Grail. I flipped it open and pointed right at the clause, highlighted in crimson. This dock and associated property are excluded from HOA jurisdiction, reserved for private family use indefinitely. The color drained from Brad's face. Karen backed away like a cartoon villain, realizing she had walked into a trap. "She said it was community property," Brad muttered, blinking like he'd just been hit with a shovel. "She said it was fine." I shrugged. Karen says a lot of things, most of them wrong. But before they could recover, the guests began arriving in full force. Some tried to pretend everything was normal, dodging ducks and goose droppings in their Sunday best. Others had clearly heard rumors of what was happening and showed up armed with popcorn, lawn chairs, and smartphones, already filming. One teenager was live streaming the whole disaster under the title, "Duck Wedding Gone Wild," and the viewer count was climbing so fast you could practically hear the internet giggling. Some brave soul shouted, "Release the quacking," and the crowd erupted into applause. Karen looked like she was trying to physically hold her own soul inside her body by sheer willpower alone. But the final nail in the coffin wasn't the guests laughing. It wasn't the geese standing guard at the altar like feathered bouncers. No, it was when a white van pulled up from the local wildlife sanctuary. See, in my spare time that week, I had emailed them, asking if they'd like to check out the newly thriving duck habitat by the lake. And here they were, clipboard-wielding volunteers taking notes, smiling, congratulating me on my incredible conservation efforts. Karen stormed up, her voice hitting a pitch only dogs could hear. "This is private, you can't just..." One of the volunteers, a cheerful woman in khakis and a bucket hat, smiled sweetly and said, "Actually, under state conservation law, we have full access to monitor natural wildlife populations on private lakefronts. Beautiful work you're doing here. We're going to submit you for a local preservation award." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Meanwhile, two geese seized the opportunity to waddle triumphantly up the aisle, knocking over a decorative archway with a loud crash that made the bride's mother scream and clutch her pearls like she was witnessing a murder. The best part? A goose somehow managed to hop onto the DJ's table. The DJ, either too brave or too dumb to care, tried to shoo it. Bad move. The goose flapped its wings furiously, knocking over the speakers, tripping a wire, and triggering an accidental bass drop that sent everyone scrambling like they were under attack. The minister, who had clearly given up all hope, simply announced over the chaos, "If anyone objects to this marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace," and a goose honked directly into the microphone. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Karen, looking like she was about to spontaneously combust, turned to the bride, who at this point was sitting on a folding chair sobbing into her bouquet, while Brad stood frozen, sweat stains spreading under his arms like Rorschach tests of bad decisions. This wasn't just a wedding. It was an extinction-level event, and there was no recovery from it. Not for Karen, not for Brad, and definitely not for the once pristine dream of lakeside elegance she had tried to steal. This wasn't just property karma. This was a full-blown feathery uprising. And I hadn't even unleashed my final move yet. Oh no, Karen, you didn't just mess with a neighbor. You messed with the entire animal kingdom. Right? If you thought Karen was going to back down after being flattened by ducks, tripped up by geese, and publicly humiliated by the entire neighborhood, you clearly don't know the species of human known as the HOA Karen. No. Karen did what Karen always did when reality hit her like a 2-ton truck. She doubled down. With the ceremony collapsing faster than her reputation, she screeched into a folding chair, whipped out her phone, and began frantically punching numbers like she was calling for an airstrike. Her plan was clear: salvage the wedding at any cost. Her mistake? Thinking she was still in control. The ceremony began, if you could call it that. A frazzled minister tried to rally the remaining guests, most of whom were either filming or trying to escape bird assaults. Karen stood at the front of the dock, commanding the remnants of her niece's bridal party like a general ordering a retreat under cannon fire. The bride, poor girl, was now coated in feathers, frosting, and what might have been goose droppings. Her mascara had melted into black rivers down her face, giving her the tragic aura of a Victorian widow mourning a cake instead of a husband. She tiptoed forward, bouquet trembling, while Karen hissed at her under her breath, "Smile, smile for the pictures." And then, because the universe has a flawless sense of comedic timing, it happened. A goose, let's call him Goosezilla because he was at least 30 pounds of pure rage, waddled into the center aisle, spread his wings like an avenging angel, and let out a honk so loud, the DJ actually dropped his headphones. The bride shrieked and backpedaled straight into the chocolate fountain, sending a tidal wave of brown syrup flying into the air. It coated her dress, her face, the altar, everything in a thick, gooey mess. She looked like a creature rising from the Willy Wonka lagoon. People gasped. A small child clapped. Karen froze, her mouth opening so wide you could have parked a golf cart in it. She sprinted toward the bride, shrieking, "Fix her! Someone fix her dress!" But nobody moved. Even the geese seemed stunned. That's when the ducks, emboldened by the chaos, launched their final offensive. Like tiny, waddling pirates, they swarmed the buffet table, a dozen ducks working in perfect coordinated anarchy, knocking over trays, pecking into potato salad, dragging paper plates into the lake like plundered treasure. Goose, that's probably the same hero from earlier, leapt onto the wedding cake, stomped right through the middle tier, and proudly honked like he was planting a victory flag. The bride collapsed onto a folding chair, sobbing. Brad stomped his foot so hard that his cheap rental shoes split open at the sole. Karen tried to rally what few guests remained, shouting that the ceremony would continue no matter what. But it was over. The guests? They weren't even pretending anymore. They whipped out their phones, live streaming the carnage. Hashtags already trending, Duckpocalypse, Karen v. Wildlife, Goosezilla, wedding. At one point, someone pulled out a Bluetooth speaker and blasted Flight of the Valkyries as a background track while ducks trampled through the carnage. It was beautiful. It was tragic. It was better than any movie Hollywood could ever script. Karen made one last desperate attempt to salvage dignity. She grabbed the soggy microphone, screamed, "This is a beautiful day! This is still a beautiful day!" right before a goose yanked the microphone cable out of the speaker, effectively muting her mid-rant. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft plop of another chunk of cake sliding into the lake. Brad gave up first. He yanked off his jacket, threw it on the ground, and stomped toward the parking lot without a single word. The bride followed a few minutes later, mascara dripping, shoes in her hand, looking like a sad ghost, floating over the battlefield. "Karen?" Oh, Karen stayed. She stayed because people like Karen can't accept defeat unless it's tattooed across their forehead. She tried to gather up the chairs, the decorations, salvage the altar, but every step she took, the ducks followed. Every time she bent over to pick something up, a goose honked at her rear like a judgmental referee at a sporting event. She eventually collapsed onto the dock, soaked, frosting-stained, surrounded by the wreckage of her dreams, in a flotilla of smirking ducks. And me? I sat back with a fresh glass of lemonade, tipped my hat to the chaos, and thought, this is justice. Nature's justice. But I wasn't done yet. Because while Karen thought this nightmare was ending, I was just getting started. Karen should have walked away. She should have packed up her soggy decorations, her shredded pride, and her clipboard of lies and just slithered into obscurity. But no, Karen had a spirit fueled by equal parts rage and pure delusion. Within 24 hours of the Great Duck Uprising, she declared war. First salvo? A mass email to the entire HOA community, titled, "Urgent Message About Domestic Terrorism at the Lake. I swear I'm not making that up." In it, Karen spun a tale so wild it would make a soap opera writer blush. According to her, the ducks were weaponized. I had, in her words, deliberately trained an army of hostile waterfowl to attack an innocent wedding gathering. She compared the scene to a war zone and suggested that future HOA events needed mandatory wildlife inspections. She even floated the idea that I might be cited for aggressive bird harboring. The only thing missing was a claim that the ducks had diplomatic immunity. Naturally, the neighborhood lost it. The comments section underneath her post turned into a full-on roast session. Someone photoshopped a duck wearing army fatigues and sunglasses, captioned Quack Force 1. Another neighbor wrote, "I, for one, welcome our new duck overlords." Even the local high school drama club got involved, announcing they were adapting the event into a one-act play called Duckageddon, the Karen Chronicles. And then came the Facebook groups. One neighbor created a page called Friends of Freedom Ducks, which racked up hundreds of likes overnight. Memes poured in, Karen's face superimposed onto disaster movie posters, ducks standing triumphantly on her ruined wedding altar. Someone even organized a Freedom Flap parade, a totally unauthorized neighborhood march where kids wore duck costumes and honked their way down the block. You'd think at that point Karen would realize she was beaten. But no, she doubled down again. Karen filed an official complaint with the city, accusing me of creating an unsafe environment by failing to control invasive avian species. City officials, no doubt struggling not to laugh, sent an inspector. The poor guy showed up at my house, clipboard in hand, looking like he already regretted his life choices. I walked him down to the lake, showed him the happy ducks, the new quack territory enter at your own risk sign, and handed him the updated property deed showing I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. He chuckled, shook his head, and said, "Honestly, this is the most wholesome invasion I've ever inspected. You're clear." He even asked if he could bring his kids by to feed the ducks sometime. Karen, predictably, lost her mind when she heard about the visit. She cornered the poor inspector in the driveway and ranted so long that he eventually just got in his truck and drove away mid-sentence. But she wasn't done yet. No, Karen's piece de resistance came in the form of an HOA emergency meeting. She showed up looking like a villain from a community theater production of Legally Blonde, all pastel blazer, oversized sunglasses, and a stack of manila folders that she slapped onto the table like she was slamming down the evidence in a murder trial. Karen gave a long, rambling speech about how my ducks had ruined lives, endangered the fabric of the community, and caused irreversible emotional distress to everyone within a 5-mile radius. She even started fake crying halfway through, dabbing her eyes with a tissue so aggressively it looked like she was sanding her own face. The room was silent. People weren't angry. They were stunned into awe, the same way you watch a slow-motion car crash and can't look away. Then came my moment. Calmly, I stood up, walked to the center of the room, and played a video compilation on the projector. A highlight reel, if you will, of Karen waking me up with clapping, setting up the wedding without permission, screaming at ducks, slipping into cake, and finally, my personal favorite, her screaming, "This is a beautiful day," while covered in feathers and punch. When the video ended, the room erupted. Some people laughed so hard they had to leave. Someone shouted, "Best HOA meeting ever!" Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't think nature allowed outside of tomatoes. The HOA president, an elderly man who had spent the last decade avoiding conflict at all costs, simply sighed, looked at Karen and said, "Ma'am, your actions have embarrassed this community, endangered wildlife, and violated at least 3 property clauses. You are hereby removed from all board duties, effective immediately." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but nobody was listening anymore. The crowd was already standing, applauding not for me, but for the ducks. Someone tossed a handful of birdseed into the air like confetti. As Karen stormed out, the minister from the failed wedding ceremony called out after her, "Bless the ducks, not the drama." The crowd laughed and cheered again. It was a full-blown exorcism, and Karen was the demon, finally being shown the door. Outside the community center, people gathered around me like I was a war hero returning home. One neighbor offered me homemade cookies. Another, a retired Marine, saluted me and said, "You fought the good fight, son." Kids asked if the ducks could come to their birthday parties. Someone even suggested erecting a bronze duck statue on the dock in honor of the Battle of Quack Lake. It was a perfect ending, almost. Because as I stood there in the golden sunset, ducks quacking proudly around me, I realized something very important. Karen wasn't gone forever. People like her don't vanish. They regroup, they plot, they simmer, and the next time she tried anything, I would be ready. Because I didn't just have ducks now. We had a movement, and we were just getting started. And Karen wasn't beaten. Oh no, she was cornered. And if there's one thing more dangerous than a Karen with a clipboard, it's a Karen with a printer and too much time. The week after her duckpocalypse humiliation, she doubled down. Flyers, emails, HOA posts, even a dramatic open letter published in the community Facebook group titled, "A Call to Defend Our Rights Against Will-the-Life Terrorism." She accused me, in writing, of masterminding an intentional insurgency using semi-aquatic mercenaries to destabilize neighborhood values. She called it an act of suburban warfare. I had to pause reading just to wipe the tears of laughter from my face. Semi-aquatic mercenaries. That's what ducks were now. But it didn't stop there. Karen began lobbying other neighbors, trying to whip up a petition to evict. She went door to door with a clipboard, her Excalibur telling everyone I was training the ducks for further attacks. Yes, attacks. As if next week I was going to unleash tactical duck squads on Tuesday trash pickups. The kicker? Out of nearly 200 houses, she got 3 signatures. One was her own. The second was her sister Cheryl, who still looked traumatized from the wedding debacle. The third? Some poor new guy who thought he was signing up for a pancake breakfast. Meanwhile, I wasn't idle. While Karen was out there fear-mongering about Duck NATO, I was meeting with my lawyer neighbor Dave and the new, very anti-Karen HOA board. Together, we pulled every HOA record, every community vote, every past complaint she had ever filed, and discovered something delicious. Karen had been abusing her position for years. Unauthorized fines, secret parties, selective enforcement, shady vendor kickbacks on community improvements. We built a paper trail so thick you could have bricked up her front door with it. And once we had it, we didn't go public, not yet. We saved it. We waited. Because Karen, in her infinite wisdom, filed an official civil complaint. She was suing me, personally, for emotional distress, duck PTSD, public ridicule, and hostile environmental engineering. She even tried to claim financial damages for the devaluation of wedding photos and loss of future HOA leadership potential. It was the most unhinged document I'd ever seen, and we welcomed it like Christmas morning. Word day came. Karen showed up looking like a cross between a funeral director and a cruise ship captain, decked out in a black pantsuit and a wide-brimmed hat, dragging 2 overstuffed binders labeled "Evidence of Terror." She tried to strut in like a winner, but you could practically see the steam pouring out of her ears. I showed up with Dave, calm as a summer afternoon, holding one thin, organized folder and a USB drive. The judge, a weary woman who looked like she'd seen every flavor of human nonsense, called us forward. She asked Karen to present her case first. Karen launched into a speech about premeditated aquatic assault, using phrases like avian weapons of mass disruption and intentional bird-induced hysteria. She sobbed about wedding dreams shattered by feathered terrorism and compared herself to a refugee displaced by biological warfare. I kid you not, the court reporter had to pause twice because she was laughing too hard to keep typing. When it was our turn, Dave stood up and calmly handed over our evidence packet. Property deeds showing my land was private, emails showing Karen admitting she never had permission, HOA documents revealing her abuse of power, and finally, the security footage, complete with Karen's own voice whispering, "He doesn't need to know. It'll be too late." The judge watched the video. She leaned back slowly, folded her hands, and said, "Let me get this straight. You trespassed, organized an unauthorized event, invited unapproved guests, lied about permission, got attacked by naturally occurring ducks on private property, and now you're blaming the homeowner for emotional trauma? Karen opened her mouth. The judge held up a finger. Ma'am, if I allowed this case to proceed, every squirrel in this county could sue homeowners for climbing trees. The courtroom erupted with laughter. Karen's face went bright red. Her binder slipped out of her hands and exploded on the floor like a shame grenade. The judge dismissed her complaint with prejudice, meaning she couldn't even refile. Then she added, almost smiling, "You're lucky the homeowner isn't countersuing for harassment and defamation, because frankly, he'd win." Karen tried to protest, but her voice cracked. She stumbled out of the courtroom like a deflated parade balloon, dragging her binders like broken wings behind her. Outside, a group of neighbors who had come to watch clapped politely. One guy handed me a fake plastic duck trophy labeled Winner, HOA Quackdown 2025. I accepted it with a bow. The war was over. Karen's empire was not just defeated, it was annihilated. And yet, even as she vanished from the HOA board, lost her standing in the community, and became the subject of more memes than I could count, I knew in my heart she still didn't get it. Because people like Karen, they don't believe they lose. They just think the game cheated. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.